You may recall at the beginning of this pandemic that a lot of the early cases were reported to have been people who worked at a particular market, a seafood market, the Huanan Wholesale Seafood Market, or the Huanan Market for short. And this market, it turns out, sold much more than seafood. Market authorities contended that all reported live and frozen animals sold in the market were from farms that were legally licensed for breeding and quarantine, and that no illegal trade in wildlife had been found. So June 7th, shortly after the WHO report was released, suggesting that there were no relevant live animals being sold at the Huanan market, despite the fact that there were so many cases initially identified there. On June 7th, a team led by Chinese researchers from Wuhan showed that, well, no, actually, we've been going to the markets in Wuhan every month for the last 4 years, all the way up to November of 2019, and there have been tens of thousands of illegally sourced live mammals that we've observed, and some of those are the same ones that were involved in the origin of the first SARS pandemic or epidemic 20 years before. Things like raccoon dogs, which look just like a cross between a raccoon and a dog, masked palm civets and badgers. All of these things were infected with SARS viruses in markets in 2002 to 2004. And they were found not widely in Wuhan, but at 4 different markets. And so I want you to remember again, this is a city of 12 million people, and there's just 4 places where these things are being sold. A really crucial question to ask was, this large percentage of cases who were identified early on who worked at this market, was this a real phenomenon? Or were we being tricked by what scientists call ascertainment bias, which is represented by this guy looking for his lost keys under the lamppost because that's the only place that the light is good? So the question is, was the pattern of lots of cases being linked to these workers at a seafood market, which we now know sold live mammals that are the sorts that transit these viruses from their ultimate bat reservoir into humans, was that just because perhaps that's the only place that people initially were looking for these viruses? So I had a colleague actually who told me, don't make anything of the fact that all of these cases were linked to the market, because that's how China's shield that they set up to prevent the next SARS pandemic was set up. They were focused on these live animal markets because that's where SARS came from. And so I thought, okay, maybe that's true. Maybe it's just a mirage, or maybe once an initial case was found there, epidemiologists just focused on that market and didn't really look across the rest of the city. And so for me, this was a crucial question because this is a way to falsify the hypothesis that this epidemic actually started through the wildlife trade at this market. And as scientists, our job is to try to kick the tires and poke holes in these ideas. And so I spent several months, mostly in the basement, on my laptop, going backward through time and kind of peeling back the layers of the onion to go from studies that were published early on in January and February, talking about 50% of the early cases being linked to the market, or 60% of the cases, trying to find a sort of pure observation that couldn't have been tainted by this focusing where the light is good. So those studies that were published later on, they very much could have been influenced by, once epidemiologists knew that there was a potential link to the market, they could have just focused primarily on the market, for example. What I got back to was a very interesting story, which is this doctor here, Zhixian Zhang, Zhang being the family name. And things really took a turn in the history of this pandemic on December 27th. So on December 27th, Dr. Zhang saw CT scan images from a 63-year-old couple who both had pneumonia, where they were tested and there was no virus and no bacterium that they could point to that was causing this. And so we sometimes call this pneumonia of unknown etiology. And these are the kinds of patients that we really try to know about early, because they're the ones that can be the canary in the coal mine for new pandemics. So on December 27th, she reported this to the local district CDC. And then over the next 2 days, and I should note that this couple, this family, had no link to the Huanan market. So the discovery that there was probably a new pandemic or a new outbreak of viral pneumonia was not linked to the Huanan market. So that idea can go out the window. But over the next 2 days, 4 more people were identified in her hospital with the same symptoms and signs, and every one of them worked at the Huanan market. So at that point, the main clinicians and administrators of her hospital got together, had a meeting. They had heard that 2 other hospitals also were seeing patients who worked at the Huanan market with pneumonia. And so they contacted the Wuhan CDC and the Hubei provincial CDC and said, we've got something going on here. So it wasn't until December 29th that there was any opportunity for this kind of ascertainment bias. And at multiple hospitals, the patients who had filtered in before that point, about 50% of them had a link to the market. So we can be sure that in this sea of 12 million people, there was an inordinate proportion of them who were linked to this single workplace. I read this WHO report in the spring of 2021 and was frustrated because it was clear that there was information, really, really rich information, relevant to the origins in this report, namely the residential locations of about 170 of the earliest hospitalized COVID patients in Hubei province, most of them in the confines of Wuhan proper. But the maps in the study were these grainy, poorly resolved maps that had points that were about 2 kilometers in diameter. And in the central part of the city, where most of the cases were, the points were overlapping with each other. And so it seemed like you couldn't make heads or tails of the actual locations. But it was really tantalizing to me, because if you could start asking questions like, for this early snapshot of these cases, the earliest cases in the world, for which we have nothing comparable for any other pandemic. For HIV, we have no idea where the first patients lived exactly. For the flu, Spanish flu, even for the 2009 flu pandemic, it's just a complete black box. But for this pandemic, there's this information. After months and months of pulling my hair out in frustration, I realized that if you combine 2 maps, one that had geographical features that you could actually connect to another map and know where you're at, and another that lacked features but could be overlaid on the other one, we could actually get about 156 out of the 164 case locations early on in this outbreak. And so now let's get back to these competing ideas about, did this arise at a wet market or a live animal market? Or did this arrive, for example, at the focus of most of the so-called lab leak speculation, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which has a couple of campuses, the nearest one being about an 18-kilometer drive from the Huanan market, faster by train, but a good distance away. And here's what it looks like when you plot the cases that we know were linked to the Huanan market. These people worked there or visited recently or had contact with someone who did. So epidemiologically, we know there's some linkage with the market. And there's an indication that they kind of live around the market and not so much around the Wuhan Institute of Virology. But much more interesting to me, getting back to this ascertainment bias issue, I was much less interested in ones that were linked to the market, because once the market had been identified, then there was actual focus on the market, and so some of these cases may have been found because of that. But interestingly, more cases were actually unlinked to the market in this December data set. So these are people who now, in blue, were asked, did you work there? Did you know anyone who did? Did you visit? No, no, no. And yet, there's an even stronger pattern of them living around the market. And so here's what it looks like when you start doing some statistics. So in the bottom right, and this is just remarkable to me that these data come from these sort of fuzzy maps in this WHO report. I kind of reverse engineered them and made them into latitudes and longitudes and then put them into statistical software to sort of take their locations and find what part of Wuhan, of this 8,000 square kilometer city, had the highest probability of drawing an early case. And the highest 1% contour is actually this very, very small region with the Huanan market right in the middle of it. Which, again, just makes you stop and think, okay, of all of the places in a city of 12 million people, why are the people who are showing up at the hospital earliest but have no actual known link to the market living around it?